What if I told you that a war doesn't always begin with bombs? What if a war could start without soldiers crossing borders, without missiles fired, without a formal declaration on paper? What if I told you that right now, millions across the world believe the United States has already declared war on Venezuela? Not with tanks, but with sanctions, economic strangulation, political isolation, covert pressure, and military signaling? Is this just political drama? Or are we witnessing the early stages of a modern, undeclared war? Why is Venezuela constantly in Washington's crosshairs? Why does every geopolitical crisis eventually point back to Caracas? And most importantly, who really pays the price if this conflict explodes? Tonight we go deep, not into headlines, not into propaganda, but into the truth behind the claim. Has the USA declared war on Venezuela? Stay with me till the end, because the climax of this story could reshape Latin America and the global power order forever. Act 1. Why this question even exists. Let's start with the most important clarification. As of today, there is no official declaration of war by the United States against Venezuela. So then, why does this question even exist? Why are people searching for it? Why are analysts debating it? Why do Venezuelan leaders openly accuse the U.S. of warfare? The answer lies in how modern wars are fought. In the 21st century, wars don't always begin with invasions. They begin with pressure, economic pressure, political pressure, diplomatic pressure, psychological pressure. And Venezuela has experienced all four relentlessly for over a decade. Act 2. The root of the conflict, why Venezuela matters. To understand the tension, we must answer one question. Why Venezuela? The answer is simple and dangerous. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran, more than Russia. Oil isn't just fuel, oil is power. Oil determines currencies, alliances, and wars. But Venezuela did something unforgivable in the eyes of Washington. It refused to play by U.S. rules. From Hugo Chavez to Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela chose state control over oil, resistance to U.S. influence, alliances with Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba. This wasn't just ideological rebellion, it was a direct challenge to U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere. And history tells us one thing very clearly. The United States does not tolerate challengers in its backyard. Act 3. Sanctions. War without bombs. If war is about forcing a nation to submit, then sanctions are the modern battlefield. The U.S. sanctions on Venezuela, crippled oil exports, blocked access to international banking, froze foreign assets, isolated the country diplomatically. These sanctions were officially described as targeted against the regime. But the reality? Hospitals lost medicine. Food imports collapsed. Inflation exploded. Ordinary Venezuelans paid the price. This is why Venezuelan leadership calls it economic warfare. And here's the critical question. If a country deliberately destroys another nation's economy, causes mass suffering, and aims to force regime change, is that not a form of war? This is the first reason people say the war has already begun. Act 4. Regime change, the undeclared objective. Let's talk about regime change. The U.S. openly recognized an opposition leader as Venezuela's legitimate president in the past. Think about that. Imagine another country declaring a new president for the United States. This wasn't diplomacy, this was intervention. Multiple attempts were made to isolate Maduro, encourage military defections, spark internal collapse. From alleged coup plots to mysterious mercenary incursions, Venezuela became a playground of covert pressure. Whether all accusations are true or exaggerated doesn't change one thing. Trust is completely broken. When diplomacy dies, conflict fills the vacuum. Act 5. Military signals, silent but loud. Now comes the most dangerous part. The U.S. has repeatedly deployed naval forces in the Caribbean, conducted joint exercises near Venezuelan waters, increased surveillance operations. Officially, these are called anti-narcotics operations or regional security missions. But militaries speak a different language. Presence is pressure, proximity is threat, silence is warning. To Venezuela, this looks less like law enforcement and more like preparation. Again, no bombs, no invasion, but the shadow of force is unmistakable. AC-6, the global chessboard. Venezuela is not alone, and this is where the story becomes global. Russia sees Venezuela as a strategic ally near U.S. borders, a counterbalance to NATO expansion. China sees Venezuela as an energy partner, a symbol of resistance to U.S. financial dominance. Iran sees Venezuela as a fellow sanctions target, a partner in bypassing Western systems. So what happens if Venezuela falls? It's not just Caracas that loses, it's Moscow, Beijing, Tehran. That's why this isn't a local conflict. This is Cold War logic revived. ACT-7, Media War, Controlling the Narrative. Another battlefield exists, and you're standing in it right now, the information war. Western media often portrays Venezuela as a failed state, a dictatorship, a humanitarian disaster. Venezuelan media portrays the U.S. as an imperial aggressor, an economic strangler, a destabilizing force. Truth exists somewhere in between. But when narratives harden, compromise disappears. And when compromise disappears, war becomes inevitable. Act 8. The question every viewer is asking. So let's directly answer the question burning in your mind. Has the USA declared war on Venezuela? Legally? No. Practically? The tools of warfare are already in use. Sanctions, isolation, military signaling, political interference. This is not a traditional war, it's a hybrid war, and hybrid wars are far more dangerous because they can escalate overnight. Climax. What happens if this turns hot? If this conflict turns into open war, the consequences will be catastrophic. Latin America will destabilize. Oil markets will explode. Global inflation will surge. US-Russia-China tensions will spike. And worst of all, millions of innocent Venezuelans will become casualties of geopolitics. This is why restraint matters. This is why dialogue matters. This is why the world should be watching closely. Because once the first missile flies, there is no rewind button. Final message. Strong ending. The story of Venezuela is not just about oil, not just about ideology, not just about America. It is a warning about how modern wars begin quietly, a warning about power without accountability, a warning about a world sliding back into confrontation instead of cooperation. The question is no longer, has war been declared? The real question is, how long can the world pretend this isn't already won? See you in next videos. Like, share, and subscribe.